Again, the way we're planning to do this tonight is not real formal. We don't see this as a lot of speeches and you people not participating, especially if you want to. And so I'm going to handle the next 20 minutes. And if you haven't been programmed to speak, Bill Davis, raise your hand, Bill, is going to handle the second hour. And we're asking a lot of you to stand up and remember either your fight against the war or your remembrances of what it was about. I guess for some of you, you weren't born. Some of us wished we weren't. This is actually the 20th anniversary of the end of the war. In Vietnam, right now, is the 30th. It's not tomorrow, it's today. 20 years ago, Vietnamese tanks rolled into Hanoi, and the last vestiges of the United States were kicked out. We think that was a good thing. We think the United States had no business being there to begin with. Unfortunately, we weren't smart enough to learn in college about not going. For Vietnam vets against the war, most of whom enlisted, most of whom were in combat units, we had to actually go to Vietnam. We had to actually fight to learn the truth. When we came back, we formed an organization to continue to fight for peace, and that's what we're trying to do. McNamara just wrote a book saying that the war was wrong. And if you listen to the news media, the only thing that's important is whether he's making money, why he didn't say something about it sooner. The main thing about McNamara is not his personality, but the fact that the main architect that's still alive around the U.S. intervention and invasion of Vietnam is now saying that that war was wrong. He is confirming things that we said 25 and 30 years ago. And it's never too late to hear the truth. And the truth is much more important than veterans in the United States who are starting to feel bad because they didn't have a victory parade when they came home. It's a lot more important than every single Republican candidate of my generation, not one of whom did not go in the service. It was interesting to watch Phil Graham start his campaign for the presidency by having cannons being shot off when he got 3 different deferments but didn't go on active duty in a war he believed in because it wouldn't be good for his career. After all, being a college professor in economics is very competitive. But whether it's Army, whether it's Newt Gingrich, whether it's Bennett, whether it's Kemp, whether it's Rush Limbaugh, none of them went. And yet all of them were willing to fight to the last drop of our blood and send us back to a second time if necessary. The Vietnamese just released the statistics on the casualties in Vietnam, and so for the first time we have the definitive numbers, and it's a lot worse than any of us thought. During the course of the U.S. war in Vietnam, and that's important, there was 4 million Vietnamese who died. 2.1 million Vietnamese civilians. 1.1 million North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. 600,000 ARVN. 300,000 Vietnamese are MIAs. Since the war, or the U.S. war in Vietnam, ended 20 years ago, 50,000 Vietnamese babies have been born with birth defects due to Agent Orange. And that's going to continue for 40 more years. The United States lost 60,000 troops. The Vietnamese lost 4 million people. American vets who returned have had children who have been born deformed. But it's the Vietnamese who will bear the brunt of the United States' attempt to win that war for 40 more years. We're talking about a point 60 years when the war is over in which babies will be born with birth defects due to the U.S. policy there. We have a number of other tapes which we'll be showing you, and we have a whole bunch of prepared speakers and singers. And the main thing is this to be a celebration, even though the way this thing is set up, So we expect all of you to do a number of things. One, we expect you to go to the bar and get something to drink. Now, we don't care whether that's iced tea or a beer, but we expect you to do that. Two, we expect you to travel around. We've got a couple of tables set up. We have posters and T-shirts, hats, propaganda, and all that kind of stuff which you can't get anyplace else. And we expect you to buy some stuff. We also expect you to stop by and see the display on the war in Vietnam. And we don't want you to feel like you have to stay in your chair and watch us, like we're entertainers. We want you to share in a celebration of the victory of the Vietnamese, because as the Vietnamese said to me when I was in North Vietnam in 1972, I had the pleasure of withstanding Nixon's Christmas bombing on North Vietnam in December of '72. The only American who fought in the South and lived under B-52s in the North. And the Vietnamese told me, years from now, when you're back in America and the war is over, you'll be able to celebrate this event, and that's what I'm proud about doing right now. For our first speaker, to start us off, I want a national staff person, Joe Miller.
Good afternoon, everybody. Barry said you're going to have prepared speakers. That sounds like a recipe of some sort, but my comments are basically going to be fairly impromptu and as short as possible. I volunteered to speak among one of the first because I'm probably one of the earlier Vietnam veterans in the group. I enlisted in the Navy in 1961 and served in the Tonkin Gulf on the USS Ticonderoga during the Tonkin Gulf incidents in August of 1964 and spent the next 2 years on that ship. I came out of Naval Intelligence. I worked for the National Security Agency, and 30 years ago, in late April 1965, our ship had just come back from our tour, as they referred to it, in the Western Pacific. We had just come back from engaging in the Tonkin Gulf incidents. We were now in San Francisco, so the ship could be repaired and overhauled for us to go back and participate in the massive bombing that was taking place in Vietnam 30 years ago. Also 30 years ago, my wife and I were living in San Francisco because the ship was in dry dock there. My wife was 2 months pregnant with my beautiful daughter, Lisa, who's here with us tonight. And I was reading a lot about what we were doing in Vietnam. I didn't buy the official lies about the Tonkin Gulf because I was there and I knew what happened. McNamara still claims he's not sure, but I'm pretty sure. And so that caused me to think about things, to read about things, and being in San Francisco for the first 6 months of 1965 gave me a unique opportunity to read and think and wonder over what I was going to be going back to in the fall of 1965 when our ship was scheduled to go back. With that as background, I came out of the service in 1968. I had become anti-war by 1965. I spent 3 years in the U.S. Navy basically speaking up as much as I would dare to anybody who would listen about the war and trying to get people to raise questions about it. I wasn't brave enough to put myself in a situation where I might end up in prison, like so many of our brothers are, but I was at least doing a part that I felt I could do to try to get people to ask questions. I came out of the Navy in 1968 after 3 years of that kind of activity, joined the anti-war movement immediately. By 1970, I had joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War here in Chicago, and I've been a member ever since. When I think about what happened 20 years ago today, 1975, all I can think about is the sense of it's over, the Vietnamese people have got their country back. What a great feeling that was. It made everybody feel that with all the pain that had been caused and felt on all sides of that war that finally the Vietnamese people were able to get about the business of getting their country in shape. Obviously, the war didn't end for the Vietnamese people. The U.S. has continued to fight an economic war and a political war against the people in Vietnam, but they seem to be, as they did during the heaviest days of the war, they seem to be withstanding it and seem to be coming through. I can only say that I'm happy to be here as part of the celebration, and I hope that some other people who may not have thought that they wanted to speak might have a thought to come up and say a few words. I'm glad to see everybody here, and I hope we have a good party. Thank you.
Remind you as the evening goes on, all of a sudden the spirit moves you and you remember something from your youth, to see Bill Davis, who is at the bar right this minute sweating beads because not one person has come up to say, hey, I remember something I want to say. Maybe it's because your father was evil. He was a Vietnam vet. The war in Vietnam ended primarily because the Vietnamese won on the battlefields. The Vietnamese also said that the second front was the anti-war movement around the world, and especially the anti-war movement in the United States. Richard Nixon confirmed this when he wrote his book summarizing the Vietnam War and saying that if it wasn't for the anti-war movement, he would have used nuclear weapons to win the war in Vietnam. If we did nothing else in the anti-war movement except stop the use of nuclear weapons, if we demonstrated for 13 years and took all the casualties we took and did nothing more than stop nuclear bombs from falling on Indochina, the 13 years was worth it. We did a lot more than that. We changed the face of America. When people went to fight the Gulf War, what was the first thing that George Bush said? This won't be another Vietnam. And when it was over, he said, we've kicked the Vietnam syndrome. And when troops went into Somalia, the first thing the news media and the people in the streets said was, is this going to be another Vietnam? The Vietnam syndrome ain't kicked, and one thing we're going to do is make sure that the Vietnam syndrome goes on until we're dead. With a great pleasure that I introduce someone who isn't a member of VVAW or Vietnam Vets Against the War. Someone who spent years fighting against the war in Vietnam, putting his body on the line like hundreds of thousands and millions of other Americans, and who, when the war was over, didn't stop the struggle and became an important regional and national leader in the struggle for Palestinian rights and justice. Dick Reilly worked with the Palestinian Solidarity Committee for, I'm sure, more time than he cares to remember. And we're asking a few words from someone who has contributed to the struggle for more than a quarter of a century, even though he don't look. Dick Reilly.
A lot more high-tech than we had back in 1975. I can't speak for the anti-war movement. There were so many people, so many courageous people who worked hard to change this country's policy toward Vietnam and end an unjust and illegal and criminal act of aggression against the Vietnamese people. I can only speak for myself. And I have a message for the brothers who were there, you know. So my message is really from me to the younger people in this room. When I got involved in the anti-war movement in Vietnam, I was 16 years old, and it was an explosive period in American history. It was 1968. Campuses were going up everywhere. High schools were out on strike. I was a high school student organizer at that time. There was a momentum and fire and sense of purpose that united all of us, and that was to bring this war to an end and to fight for complete social and economic justice for our people at home. It was a vision that changed my life and has affected every single decision I have ever made since those days. And we were really young. I can't stress how young people were. You know, people were making life and death decisions at 17 and 18 and 19. People were choosing to go to the army, or they were choosing to go to jail, or they were choosing to fight against the man in the streets at that age. It took a lot of courage. And the one thing I am absolutely confident of is that spirit of resistance and courage still lives among the generation of young people sitting in this room tonight. I know you're fighters. I know it. I have a story, and I'll make it really brief, but it's kind of a tribute to the Vietnam veterans against the war. Alan Siegel, who was one of the staff workers on this film, the newsreel film. This film, by the way, was instrumental, really instrumental in changing perceptions and bolstering support for the anti-war movement, as was the Vietnam veterans against the war. In 1971, I worked for an underground newspaper in the state of Maine called New Morning. New Morning had a circulation of about 30,000 people, and we had anti-war activists and black liberation activists, and we had Vietnam vets working on it. One of those veterans, who was a mentor and a close friend of mine, is a man named Fred Jones. It's not his real name. Fred was a deserter from the United States Army. Fred had been returned from Vietnam from a Long Binh jail where he had spent time for having a violent disagreement with one of his officers about the morality of a particular military operation in the Central Highlands. And he had been transferred back to the States to stand court-martial and trial, and was imprisoned in Massachusetts, in Somersville, Massachusetts, in an Army stockade, and he was liberated by active duty soldiers who allowed him to escape. Fred went underground and he came to Maine, and after a year, when he thought the heat was off, he surfaced and he started showing up at rallies and speaking out and started working and writing from the perspective of someone who had been in Vietnam and fought and realized who the real enemy was. And he urged active duty soldiers to think about the war and to think about turning the guns around if necessary to bring this war to an end. In the summer of 1972, there was a strike in this little town outside of Bangor, Maine, and Fred, and people in my newspaper staff and others were involved in a labor solidarity committee, much like the Staley Worker Solidarity Committee that you all know about. The government reacted harshly against the strikers and against the strike, eager to break it, because it was very militant, and accused members of the union and members of the Solidarity Committee of being involved in a bombing attempt, which was completely fictitious. All of these people were tried and acquitted within 8 months. But Fred couldn't stand trial because Fred was wanted, and he was an Army deserter. And so the night that Fred left for parts unknown, right, we held a going away party. It was very painful. And Fred said, you know, one step at a time, one day at a time, we've got to keep the struggle alive, and we keep fighting. Wherever I am, I'll be there with you. And I have believed that. I have never seen him since. And so my salute tonight to the Vietnam veterans is a salute to Fred Jones. Run long and run free, Fred, forever. I also want to salute the impact and the courage and the commitment of every Vietnam veteran who stood up against this war. Your capacity to speak out and your capacity to provide leadership galvanized the anti-war movement in ways that nothing else did, right? We had immense respect and still have immense respect for you, and it is a tribute to Vietnam veterans against the war and to every member of Vietnam veterans against the war that you still are perceived as activists in the forefront of the struggle for social change in the United States. The Vietnamese people won a great victory on this day, and we're here to celebrate that. Principal allies of the Vietnamese people were not only the anti-war movement, but in the cutting edge of the anti-war movement, Vietnam veterans against the war. So we were all children of Uncle Ho, Bach Ho. So my testimony and sharing with you today is to tell you that Vietnam veterans against the war helped to change my life, I think for the better. And I think for all the young people in this room, talk to them, learn from them. They have a lot to offer, right? And they have immense courage. Thank you.
Our next speaker is not a speaker. Our next speaker is an artist and a singer. Jim Wachtendonk has been singing the songs of struggle and of Vietnam vets forever. He was a dog handler in Vietnam, and he came all the way down from Madison, Wisconsin to join you and to join with other people in celebrating the 20th anniversary of the end of the war. If you haven't signed up yet and all of a sudden you realize I've got to give a 3-minute rap about Vietnam, see Bill Davis.
How about on the guitar?
Oh, that'd be cool. Is this going to be... Do you want it in your pocket to move?
Oh, that's good. Well, I was a dog handler. I got drafted in late 1968, and I was not politicized at all at the point. And they ended up giving me a pooch named Sam. Proceeded to keep me alive for the next year. I'm one of those veterans that every day I walked my dog, and I walked on perimeters that were sprayed with Agent Orange and blue and purple. And even though the dogs, after they stayed there a certain amount of time, they got the jitters in their flanks and in their bodies, the Army called that Vietnamese ringworm. But what that was from the chemical defoliants that attacked their nervous system. And I walked every night in that myself, and it was in 1976 when my daughter was born with multiple birth defects, and then following that my son, who also had a lot of problems, that we met VVAW, and VVAW had answers for us. They had a support system for men and women such as my wife and I, and always be in debt to them for that. And we have passed on that information to many, many people, veteran and non-veteran alike. I think I'll start out with a song that I wrote for my foreman at work. He was a lifer in the Marine Corps. He never broke from what the rules were. And at one point in time, I was told that I'd have to work. I work in the sign department. I had to spray the curbs yellow where you can't park, and I'd have to work with chemicals like xylene, toluol, Napa Fight Stripper. And at that point, I had lost a house. I lost my health, my children's health. And I just told him I wasn't going to do it. And then he said, well, then I'm going to have your ass. I'm going to have your job. But unbeknownst to him, I sang a benefit for 2 women running for city council in Madison. And they were both elected. And then after they were elected, I gave them a resolution that said, we, the city of Madison, support Vietnam veterans in their struggle for testing, treatment, and compensation for Agent Orange poison. And it passed. And it saved my job. Because when the city attorney checked it out, he called me. I said, look up Resolution 305. And there they were. The city was in support of veterans like myself. So I saved my job. And I wrote this song about it. It's called That's All That He Knows. My foreman is an airhead. He likes to count his toes. He sits up in his office, and that's all that he knows. The job that he was hired to do is to oversee his men. He places them on jobs to do, then counts his toes again. Now if a problem might arise and workers are alarmed from chemicals with health effects, the order's been disarmed. Not to worry, it's okay, the airhead put to me. Just do your job and get back to work, or I'll cut your salary. But then there came a worker who questioned all this crap. I said I wouldn't work with poisons. I dropped that in his lap. That xylene and toluol are phenols that cause death. They've robbed the body, killed the life, and take away your breath. But my foreman, the airhead, he didn't like my tone. He said I'd better change my mind or he'd send me home. So I said, okay, fire me if you've got the guts. I ain't gonna work with poisons, no ifs or ands or buts. So letters were written, and Agent Orange did tell the story of a veteran who came back from a hell. Those chemicals, they took his health, they took his kids' health too, and now his job is on the line. What's a vet to do? Well, I got mean and angry and smarter by the by. I covered my butt in City Council Resolution 305. Yes, we, the city, do support Vietnam veterans' plight. For testing, treatment, compensation, it's a veteran's right. But my foreman, the airhead, he didn't know this, but he found out from his bosses. I think they slapped his wrist. And what the hell, and ho, 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 no more must I expose myself to those poisons. And he's back counting toes. That's my foreman, the airhead, the one who counts his toes. He sits up in his office, and that's all that he knows. Thank you. Thank you. He heard that song. I put that on my first recording incoming, and he was furious. He came after me with a vengeance, but I beat him every time by using the system that we were supposed to have been fighting for. Drove him to early retirement. You know, when I found out what Dow and Monsanto and Diamond Shamrock did to me, knowingly, when I found out that they did this to me, and not only me, but everybody in Nam, I was so ticked off that I was going to buy a gun, and I was going to get even. You know, I felt very paranoid, and I thought that things weren't going to go my way. And my wife said, Suki said, Jimmy, no guns in the house. The guns come in, the kids and I, we're going to have to leave. Oh, God, I was ticked off. What could I do? I'll write a song. So I wrote this song, and I put everything in the song that I would like to do to Dow and Monsanto and Diamond Shamrock. And it's called the Claymore Polka. Hey, Bill, can I have a drink of that beer right there, please? This song, when I wrote this song, my phone was being tapped. And I knew that Milwaukee chapter's phone was tapped too. And this is where I started my FBI file. I'm an urban terrorist. We are all urban terrorists. And I knew that if I called John and Annie Lindquist in Milwaukee, that the tap would go on. And I wanted whoever was tapping my phone to hear this song first. So they got it before any of y'all heard it. I set the phone down and I sang this. The Claymore Polka. Sorry. I'd like to blow you away with a claymore. Put a booby trap inside your briefcase. Set some bougie sticks around your mansion. Add some Agent Orange to your teeth from me. I know you use your laws to defeat me. In the end, you're hoping that you'll cheat me. But look behind your back. I'm fixing for attack. Yes, I would like to hurry things along. As you walk outside to your caddy, it might be wise to look under the hood. When you were away at your meeting, a package might be left for your own good. Yes, it could. Boom! You might think that this is not the answer. But there is something you must not forget. The Army taught me well, and I hope you go to hell, and maybe I can hurry things along. I'll blow you away with a claymore. Set a tripwire pants and sit. I hope you bite the bit. Yes, I would like to hurry things along. Good therapy, huh? I'd like to blow you away with a claymore. Put a booby trap inside your briefcase. Set some bougie sticks around your mansion. Have some agent orders to your teeth. But I'm your veteran, come back, and I'm set for attack. The army taught me well, and I hope you go to hell. And maybe I can hurry things, won't you let me hurry things? I'd like to help hurry things along. Thanks. We're gonna build us a monument, put it 10 feet into the ground. The black gold marble wall set in a V, with the war dead inscribed on the walls to see. It is truly a wonder to me. Hits me like a cold knuckle sandwich. They wanna build us this monument to America of our deeds. Make it a symbol of what we are, and deal with the wounds that we carry so far. Tell everyone of the horrible scars. The sea is a cold knuckle sandwich. La 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 la. La 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 la. La 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 la. La la la. I was a young man back in '68. Hadn't touched the face of war, felt real hate. I stood poised with eyes at death's door, at Kuwait and Beirut and El Salvador. It's all a symptom that we can't ignore. What the hell has it all been for? We don't need another cold knuckle sandwich. No, we don't need another cold knuckle sandwich. Yeah, we're gonna build us this monument, put it 10 feet into the ground. The black gold marble wall set in a V, with the war dead inscribed on the walls to see. The price was high for you and for me. We don't need another cold knuckle sandwich. No, we don't need another cold knuckle sandwich. Yeah, yeah, another cold knuckle sandwich. That it? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's good. Want to stop?
Or if you want to sing another one, sure.
Can I try a new song out on you?
Folks might like to know that Australia has just reported in, congratulating us on celebrating the 20th anniversary of the end of the war.
All right.
I wrote a rap song. It's called I'm All Nommed Up. Well, I've been known to write angry songs about the preludes set in wars. Anti-imperialistic themes abound as if the satellite holds scores. Songs about veterans soaked with fears at the conjure of the dead. But underneath all that toil and sweat, there are things left to be said. It's a never-ending story. It's a theme to sing and shout. It's a desperate, deep equation that leaves me tired and all spent out. But like lessons through experience, some are hard to hear about. So I state the stacked facts abounding. You could say them all down down. I've sung songs for different veterans. Some are heroes and some are unknown. All the finest in our own hours, like wild seeds that must be sown. Hard subjects to be listened to, but it takes a hearty ear, because the lessons from the learned do encourage and fear. There are those of you who expect the verse containing war with all its greed. I bleed the pain vein now and then to explain where it all might be. It's been years since my war ended, but there's one thing I don't doubt. These lyric lines I choose to write leave me tired and all I'm now doubt. As a player in the business, I'm unafraid what folks may think. Those who know me by my songs won't be surprised what cup I drink. Overwhelming are emotions, unforgiving is the cause. Objective from the distance, disobeying maddening laws. Frightening are the plot lines, some can take it and some cannot. I leave the back door open if the temp inside gets too hot. But no matter how it's stated, the facts I critique or tout, it's true I write for sanity, yet again I'm all now doubt. Now doubt with the terminology, turning the phrase to a metaphor. Now doubt with conjured phantoms that lie just behind the door. Now doubt keeping my balance on the edge of what's called hardcore. Now doubt hoping these lessons might put an end to war. I've known success and failure in the biz from coast to coast, but of all the gigs I've taken on, it's writing songs that I love most. Yes, the process is rewarding and the perks, they come and go. But like most players in the business, it's more than a spotlight in a show. With this finite set of symbols, country, jazz, rap, and rock and roll, the depth depends upon the players and how much they bear their souls. This is a fable now recorded, not by chance it's clear and stout. Overloaded, singed and falling, yet again, I'm all knocked out. Thank you. Thank you very much. Where's Mary? Stage adjourned, Barry. Thank you.
I'm busy emceeing from behind. Oh, yeah. There's a couple of things before we continue. One is, not only do you get to hear Jim here, but if you go in the back, you can buy his tapes and hear Jim at home. So he's got many tapes back there, which all of you want to get. He accepts checks. And so as this thing goes on, and it has to end at 6 o'clock, as this thing goes on, you want to make sure you go over, buy a T-shirt, buy a hat, buy a Frisbee. A Vietnam Vets Against the War Frisbee. Scary thing. Go back to the New World table, because on that table they have The Sorrow of War. The Sorrow of War is the first North Vietnamese book written about the war. It sold out 3 times in Vietnam. Last year it was a bestseller in Britain. And now, after all that time, it's been introduced to the United States. I read the book. It is incredible. It's unbelievable. You've got to go back to the New World table. You got to get your checkbook out, and you should buy that book, because unfortunately, it's not in your bookstore. So be sure to buy that. And when you're back there, you can pick up some tapes and listen to Jim at home. We're meeting tonight in the Hothouse. And we're able to meet here and have this event because we have no money. Because some people who are into art and into business are also into politics. And I asked Marguerite if she thought, do you have enough chairs? Do you have enough tables? Is everything going well? We really wouldn't have had this event if Marguerite hadn't allowed us to use the Hothouse. And so I want to ask Marguerite, please come on the stage, because not only do we want to ask her to say a few words, but we want to give her some gifts. VVAW is a poor organization, but we're so old, we have posters which are classics. One thing the Vietnamese taught us was that old people not only are important, but are essential. I don't think it's likely that a Vietnamese would dye or color their hair in order to try to look younger like we do here. They realize that age gives experience. And it isn't this phony family values that Dick Armey, Gingrich, the divorced Gingrich, who didn't pay child support and divorced his wife while she had cancer in a hospital. And so the first thing we want to do is give her a poster that was made by Vietnam Vets Against the War in Colorado 24 years ago. And it just shows the wonderful face of the Vietnamese peasant. And it says, united as one, we can defeat the aggressors, and they did. VVAW has been around for 28 years. And 8 years ago here in Chicago, we had our 20th anniversary. And this is a wonderful poster, which you can buy. It's over there. It's only $10. But we're giving this to Marguerite free. And I wish we had more to give her. And finally, before we let her speak, and I feel like Monty Hall. The Monty Hall of the movement. Give me another beer. It's a scarf, which can't be got anymore, which has a picture of Uncle Ho. And of course it says Building U.S. Vietnam Solidarity, and then it's in Vietnamese. And that's another thing which we don't have any more copies of. And we just wanted to thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
No, thank you. Wait. Yeah, that's on. And you have to have this because it's for our camera.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm very overwhelmed because I don't really think... it's really an honor just because I think I'm accepting this on behalf of the space more than me personally, and we'll exhibit these so that part of what we try to do at Hothouse is continuing to teach a part of history that is often overlooked and marginalized and left on the shelf. And as things dramatically change for the worse on a daily basis, we kind of feel that we need to defend these repositories of history and to present programs on a continual basis that correct the erroneous information that's being put out in the world, and particularly in Chicago in this country. So I'm deeply honored, and also we'll do our best to mount these so that other people can share them. I just want to thank everyone very much for coming out, and the reason I say that is not because I own Hothouse and I'd like to see a large audience, but I think that in this day and age it really, that we need to have these gatherings where we can come together and reaffirm the past struggles that we've been involved in, and to make connections with each other. And I know that somebody just called from Australia that was involved in the fight in Australia during the war. And so I think it's really important that we keep reaffirming what we're doing and coming together to share what has gone on in the past and what will give us the strength to continue in the future, which we think is going to be a harder and harder fight as times change here. So I just want to thank everybody and make a brief announcement that last night Amiri Baraka was here reading, and he was also known as Leroy Jones. He was a writer, he is a writer, but wrote quite a bit in the 60s, and we were very fortunate to have him reading last night, as well as the last poets who are going to be here tomorrow night at 10 p.m. And, you know, I was sort of awestruck by Baraka's reading, mostly because he represents someone who uncensoredly spoke out and continues to speak out and uses poetry and uses the means of culture to be a very strong critic of the system of the United States and of imperialism and oppression, and as well as the last poets who will be here tomorrow night. So we're always trying to make these links between using cultural work for social change, and we encourage people to come out and get involved in that and to continue to teach this history to the next generation. And it's really wonderful to see so many younger people here, because that's how we're going to beat this. So thank you very much.
One more reminder, we want all of you to participate. We don't force anybody, unlike other groups, which will make you feel real bad if you don't say anything. They'll try to guilt trip you. We aren't going to guilt trip you. Just stay in your chairs, don't buy any books. Make us have to drink and get up here and talk and look foolish. No, that's all right. Stay right where you are. Don't go see Bill Davis and say, I want to say something because I'm tired of Romo talking. Don't go over to that table and buy some books. Don't go back there and get The Sorrow of War by a North Vietnamese soldier who went south with 500 men and only 10 returned. One of the most incredible books. Don't go buy a tape of Jim Wachtendonk. Let him spend more money coming down here than you spent getting in here. Go back there and buy his tapes. One of the things that's real nice about being in VVAW is talking to younger people. And it's easy recognizing that you're getting older, because when you get up at night, because I work at night, I don't get up in the morning, but when you get up at night after having drank in the morning because you work at night, your body doesn't feel the same, and you hurt, and you don't get quite as good a sleep. But being in VVAW, you get to keep your youth, because you get to go out and talk to high schools and colleges. And one of the things that's real nice about that is that occasionally you get to see where people don't go in the military and don't offer their bodies like we did. And I don't think any Vietnam vet can feel any better about any political victory than those individuals who we were able to make contact with who give up on the military as an alternative for their life. It keeps us young. It's the only reason we do our stuff. We don't expect that we can be able to change Bill Clinton into a nice guy, or that we can make Newt Gingrich give us Agent Orange benefits. But when we're able to see the ones and the twos of people who come to an understanding about the nature of this system, I think that's what keeps us going. And so I want to introduce a person that I met in Champaign, and he was in Joe's class. And one thing I didn't tell you about Joe Miller is he teaches 4 classes. And I went down there one time and I spoke at the Y, and then there was an after discussion by the activists. And people introduced themselves on the basis of how many classes of Joe's they'd taken. It was almost like whether they'd spent 2 tours in Nam or 3 tours. I've taken 3 of them, but I won't take that last one. No, I've only taken 1, but I can't wait. I can't wait for that Vietnam class. And you get to see a lot of the young people that are around Joe and the kind of work he's doing, because there's a lot of them here in the audience today, all the way from Champaign. But I asked that I could introduce Joe, who was in Air Force ROTC, and who's graduating, and who is not going on active duty in June.
Joe Rubas, and again, I'm a University of Illinois student. It feels really weird for me to come up here and speak to everyone in this room, because it always seems to me that everyone here has so much more to offer me than I have to offer you. But I will tell you that Vietnam veterans have made a tremendous impact on my life. And I only talked for a couple of minutes, but I could talk about it forever, trying to explain to you what an impact it has had on my life. When I was in high school and beginning to head off to college, no one in my family had gone to college. Everyone in my family began working right when they got out of college. Actually, they had gone into the service right after college, or right after high school. And so this is pretty much what was expected of me. My parents really didn't expect me to go to college. They expected me to go right into the service, as everyone else in my family had done. And so I really wanted to go to college, and so I found kind of a happy median, because the Air Force ROTC was willing to pay for my college. So I figured I could go to college and make my parents happy by being in the Air Force. So this was pretty much it for me, and this is really what I thought I would do, and it became kind of my life dream to be a career officer in the Air Force. So I went to college, and I began the Air Force ROTC out of U of I, and I went through all the training, and I did really well, and I rose up to a really high position. I became the Air Force ROTC National Public Affairs Officer. Now, what my job was to do was to talk to different public affairs officers at the different Air Force ROTC branches across the country. And it was a recruiting effort. You know, we were trying to bring more people into the ROTC program and more people who would become active duty servicemen in the Air Force. This was all said and everything was fine. And then I took Professor Joe Miller's class, and the course was on the Vietnam War. And from the very first day of the class, I saw a very different version of the military and a very different version of war that I had been seeing in the Air Force. And from the very first day, it really began to tug at my conscience. And I really wasn't sure. I began to have doubts, and it was really kind of odd going from Joe's class to some of the Air Force training, because they were completely different things. I mean, I'd be in Joe's class and we'd see bombs killing people, and then I'd go to the Air Force and we'd hear about, you know, Patriot missiles and all these really good things and how bombs save lives, and it was just a complete contrast. I mean, I can't even explain it. So yeah, it really began to pull at me, and I wasn't sure if this is what I wanted to do. And then Barry Romo came and spoke in Joe's class. And of all the experiences in my entire life, I can't tell you how I walked out of this class. Because for the whole class, I argued with Barry. I was positive I could tell him that the Air Force was good, and there were good things about the Air Force. But there was just no winning. And Barry wouldn't stop. I mean, he kept arguing with me, and it really just seemed like it was just a dialogue back and forth between the two of us. But it made the difference. It really did. It was the one moment in my life where I walked out of that class and I said, you know, he's right. I mean, I tried my hardest to argue with him, and he's right. He's really right. And so then I began to think about it, and then I realized that I couldn't do it myself. There was no way I was going to serve in the Air Force. And so I thought how awful it would be if I was having doubts about it, and if I knew about all these things, and I saw these things, and I saw the other side, for me to run around the country and try to recruit people to do the same thing that I thought was wrong. So I made my decision that only weeks before I was supposed to sign for another 10 years with the Air Force, I made my decision that I wasn't going to do it. Well, of course, as I said, everyone in my family had graduated from high school and gone into the service. So possibly you could understand what it was like coming back home and telling my parents this. And just this big uproar in my family. They couldn't really understand why in the world I had changed my mind. And so I really had no ally with my family, and it became a big battle between my parents and me. As it turned out, there was one more veteran in my life that made the difference, and it was my uncle. My uncle had been shot up really bad in Vietnam. And when he came back from Vietnam, he never mentioned anything to anyone in my family. He wouldn't tell anyone what happened. I mean, he wouldn't talk about the war at all. My father didn't know anything about it. My grandparents didn't know anything about it. Nobody understood. Nobody knew anything about it. Well, he was thrilled to death to hear that I was getting out of the Air Force. And he called me up. He called me up at U of I and told me that he was on my side. And so I had a Vietnam veteran on my side in my family who was willing to sit down and talk to my parents. One of the big issues, again, one of the reasons that I decided to go into Air Force ROTC was to pay for school, because they covered tuition. What my uncle did was he set me up with a job over the summer loading trucks in Chicago. And I got paid enough with this job that I wouldn't need the Air Force any longer to pay for school. So he kind of mended the difference between my parents and I, and I got out of the Air Force. It also made a very big impact, too, because as I stayed in touch with Barry and stayed in touch with Joe and learned a little bit more about the Vietnam War and began doing an independent study on the Vietnam War, my uncle began to open up. And it was for my sister's birthday party. I called home to wish my sister happy birthday. And my uncle took the phone. He was at my parents' house. He took the phone, went into another room. For about 2 hours, I talked on the phone to my uncle. And for the very first time in his life, he opened up about the Vietnam War. So this was a really great experience for me and for my uncle and for my whole family. And just a couple months ago, my uncle sent me slides, and he still really won't talk to anybody else about it, but he will talk to me. That's made a big difference in his life. And just a week or two ago, he told me that when he was shot up in Vietnam, one of his comrades laid on top of him to protect him from getting shot anymore. And he said he never wanted to know what happened to that person. He never wanted to know when he came back to the United States whether that person had lived or not. And so he decided just only a couple weeks ago that it was time that he opened up and began talking about the war. And so he decided to find this person and write him a letter. And he was waiting for this person to write him back. So again, I really can't say enough about how it's affected me. I could never explain to everyone how veterans have changed my life and have helped my uncle out. And I know right now I'm graduating, and I know if it wasn't for the Vietnam veterans, well, they really have changed my life.
He didn't want to speak because he's not a public speaker. Vietnam touched the entire world, and we're real lucky to have some friends from the Philippines here. And I want two of our very good friends, Dong and Jimmy, to present two different interpretations. First is Dong, who I work very closely with in the Philippine Workers' Solidarity Committee. Dong was a political prisoner under Marcos, where he was held by U.S.-trained military personnel. He was subjected to torture for 3 years, and he's in the United States, where he should be the head of a high school or a college, and of course has to go back to school because who cares about the University of Philippines masters and PhDs that he holds? That's only from the Philippines. That's not from the United States. And working with Dong around the Philippines has been a wonderful experience. And I hate to go to meetings, but I love going to meetings with Barry, who won't talk, but Dong, just to talk about stuff. So first we'll have Dong, and then we'll have Jimmy. Dong, say a few words.
Thank you, Barry. I am honored to be here with you tonight, and I am honored to have friends from the Vietnam veterans against the war and other Americans of all colors who are fighting with the oppressed for democracy and justice in the world. Barry asked me if I had recollections about the Vietnam War since I was in the Philippines at that time. And I told him, of course, how could I forget about the struggle of the Vietnamese people? I was still innocent at that time. That's why I remember very clearly, because the struggle of the Vietnamese people and long discussions we had about their fight set me on the road to politicalization. I remember very well, it was one summer after school. I had just finished reviewing or rereading Philippine history And I didn't believe what the textbook was saying about the Philippine-American War. And I had a lot of questions about the involvement of Americans in that struggle. And kind of by instinct, I connected the struggle of the Filipino people in the Philippine-American War with the struggle of the Vietnamese when Nixon sent U.S. troops to Vietnam. And I had a cousin who happened to be doing some part-time job as a student in Clark Air Base. He was a medical student, and he was working in Clark Air Base helping the doctors there. And I had a long discussion with him, and I asked him, what are the Americans doing in Vietnam? They should get out. They have no business being there, I told him. And he argued, he told me, no. The Vietnamese government requested their presence. The Vietnamese government requested help, and so their presence there was needed to fight against the communists, and that's why they're there. And I told him, how would you feel if there was a civil war going on right in our country and the Yanks came over and helped one side and started shooting Filipinos? How would you feel about that? And I told him, don't you remember the Philippine-American War and the struggle of the Filipinos against the Americans at that time? That's exactly what the Vietnamese people are doing now. And, well, we almost fought physically. And my father had to separate both of us. It was a very heated argument. But around those same weeks, everybody in the Philippines was talking about the Vietnam War because President Marcos was planning to send Philippine troops to Vietnam. Nixon was trying to force him to send Filipino soldiers to Vietnam and join the American forces over there and fight against the Vietnamese people. And there were protests from the students against that. And so because of the protests, finally Marcos agreed that the Philippines would send all an engineering battalions, but armed engineering battalions to the Philippines. So everybody was talking about the struggle of the Vietnamese people, and there were student protests against that. In fact, one of the biggest protests, the earliest protest in the 70s, was when President Johnson went to Manila to visit the Philippines and talk with Marcos. And one of the biggest student demonstrations was organized against Johnson, and the students took over the hotel where President Johnson was staying. And a lot of students were hurt. There were riots in Manila, and this was all over the media. And then, of course, this was the beginning, this was at the early stage of the National Democratic Movement in the Philippines. Around this time also, wounded soldiers started coming to the hospitals in Clark Air Base, and of course a lot of American soldiers were in Subic and Clark for R&R. A lot of American soldiers could be seen in Manila. What was going on was that the National Democratic Movement started getting in contact with some of the American soldiers and started organizing an anti-war movement right in Clark Air Base and right in Subic Bay. This was an underground movement. It's not in the media at all, and very few know about this, but there was an underground anti-war movement among American soldiers right in Clark Air Base and Subic Bay going on at this time. And even very few Filipinos know about this. And we reminded them that even during the Philippine-American War, there were American soldiers, especially black soldiers, black American soldiers who defected to the Filipino insurgent movement and fought against the Americans. And we told them that there was already a movement right in Vietnam about going on. And if I'm not mistaken, many of these soldiers who went back to the U.S. got involved in the anti-war movement. Anyway, I'm rambling, and I don't want to talk too long. I want to end with a word that we have in Filipino, and I want you to say it with me. We have a word in Filipino, mabuhay, and it means long live. So I want you to say, mabuhay. Mabuhay. To the victory of the Vietnamese people, mabuhay. Mabuhay. To the unity of the American, Vietnamese, and Filipino peoples, all peoples of the world who are oppressed, mabuhay. Mabuhay. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Tom. Time's going. You haven't bought your book yet, The Sorrow of War. It's on the table back there. When this thing ends at 6 o'clock, we have to get out of here because they're going to have they're going to have art and singers and people that you should stay in here, but we have to pick up everything. So you should circulate, you should buy some of the stuff, but you should especially buy The Sorrow of War. So for all the VVAW people, that's like secret order number 12. One of the things that's real important that kept us going in a GI movement and VVAW was songs like like my brain is singing out, like Jim sang, and of course you're going to go back there and buy his tapes. But I asked Jimmy just to sing a song that they used to sing in the Philippines 25 years ago, and he said okay. And so he's going to share with us one of those traditional Vietnamese songs about struggle.
Well, actually, I'm not a singer, but I hope, for the sake of remembering all those days, this song I would like you to join me. Hope you know the tune, of course. Well, this is about the 12th day of Christmas in Vietnam. On the first day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me special kind of VD. On the second day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 2 lazy dogs and a special kind of VD. On the third day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. Join me. On the fourth day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 4 naval bombs, 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. On the fifth day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 5 Buster kids, 4 naval bombs, 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. On the sixth day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 6 strategic hamlets, 5 bastard kids, 4 naval bombs, 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. On the seventh day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 7 fleets are coming, 6 strategic hamlets, 5 bastard kids, 4 naval bombs, 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. On the 8th day of Christmas, the Yankees gave to me 8 helicopters, 7 fleets are coming, 6 strategic hamlets, 5 bastard kids, 4 naval bombs, 3 Armalites, 2 lazy dogs, and a special kind of VD. Well, I can go on and go on and go on. Well, you know everything. Thank you.
That's the unfortunate thing about the United States and other countries. You can constantly sing about the things that they do bad to the people that are there. Thank you very much, Jimmy. we're going to change the schedule just a little bit because we're going to have a short video in a second from a Vietnam widow who has probably got one of the last NEA grants, which is going to be, and no one else has ever seen, and we've got about 10 minutes to show you, which is the interchange between Vietnamese widows and American widows of the Vietnam War. But beforehand, because time is running out and people actually have to get back to class, I'm going to introduce one of Bill Davis's speakers, and that's, well, I'm just going to introduce him this way. Here is the first official foreign exchange student from the University of Illinois to the University of Hanoi, starting in January 1996. You know, when Vietnam vets get around Vietnamese, a lot of times there's a brother and sisterhood that you can't believe. Something that is shared and was shared on serving on their ground, even though we did bad things there. When Reilly came to Chicago and then down to Champaign, I saw the same sparkle in Jason's eyes that I've seen in thousands of other Vietnam vets, and it's a real pleasure to introduce him to say a few words.
Thanks, Barry. First of all, I guess I would have to ditto what Joe said earlier in regards to the impact that people like Joe Miller and Barry Romo have on some of the students down in Champaign. And like Joe, I got interested in the subject through taking Joe's Vietnam War class. I can remember sitting at my desk my sophomore year thinking, gee, what can I take? And asking some of my friends, what do you remember learning in high school about the Vietnam War? And they would look at me like, well, gee, I don't remember learning anything. And I think it was mentioned in passing a few times. And I've asked some of my friends who were taking courses down at U of I, what have you learned about the lessons of the Vietnam War? Gee, I haven't really taken a course or anything that, involves that. And so anyways, after taking Joe's course, I got really interested, did some independent study of my own. As Barry mentioned, we were able to bring Reilly Hayslip down. She had quite an impact on me. And I've become really involved with the subject, and I think that there are a lot of important lessons that can be learned from this war. And in light of that, I've essentially dedicated the rest of my life to teaching our nation's young people that. And the first step in doing that, as Barry mentioned, is going to Hanoi to study for a semester and just really absorbing the culture and learning and coming back to pursue my education and hopefully someday, doing the good work that Joe and Barry are doing and teaching our nation's young people the valuable lessons that can be learned from this war. Thanks.
I've been lucky to go back to Vietnam twice, and I'll tell you, I'd love to spend about 4 months there. We're going to show you part of a video, but of course, I haven't mentioned this yet, but at the back at the New World table, there's The Sorrow of War, the first North Vietnamese novel translated into English. And what's really important about this is that we told them to order 10 books. And so you better go back there and buy a copy of this novel, or otherwise we've caused them great harm. I'm going to set up the video. I just want to tell you very shortly what this is. I met a woman named Sabran from the Bay Area. She is an artist. Her husband died in Vietnam, and it was bizarre because when she came to my house to talk to me, he was in exactly my same unit. In fact, I had been on talk duty the day the guy died. I don't remember him at all because people didn't have names sort of like we have here in the States. But I was there the day he was killed. She's making a video on the experience of American and Vietnamese widows She went back to Vietnam, to the Quay Son Valley, where I had been a soldier, and met with people who might have killed her husband. And as she said to me, her husband may have killed their husband. And so it's a very short clip, about 8 minutes. Nobody else in the entire country has seen it. And so I want to share this with you. We want to share this with you. And then we'll continue with the open mic with a couple of more songs, but a short video.
Senseless acts of nonviolence against the state and unimaginative writing. I've been very pleased over the years to be able to travel for the organization and get to do these sort of things, because these are the best, where everyone gets a shot at the microphone and gets to tell the things that they've done over the years. And I also get to cut off people that appear to be long, boring speakers. And henceforth, I'm going to stop myself at this point. I'd like to introduce someone. When I was still on active duty and told that if you want to know anything about organizing GIs, you had to go through Chicago. And the reason you had to go through Chicago was the kind of people that were here in Chicago doing GI work at the Chicago Area Military Project, which later consolidated with VVAW, and we did the GI News, a worldwide paper. But the first and foremost paper of the GI movement was Camp News from the Chicago Area Military Project. And some of the people here, Ellie Matern, and some other people that are not here, that worked on that paper were the people that we looked up to. This paper was the London Times, New York Times, Manchester Guardian of the GI movement. It carried all the best stories from all the best GI newspapers and mimeograph sheets aboard ship, and all the struggles that no one ever heard about, except all the other GIs got this paper as a digest, and it gave them some pretty good ideas too. One of the foremost people, not the only person, but one of the foremost people that worked for that paper is a good friend of mine who still resides in Chicago and is still active with VVAW, Annie Luginbill.
I don't need a fucking microphone. I need a bullhorn for years, all right?
Yeah, just step over here. Go on. Here, just hang on to it then.
Get away from me with that equipment. Jesus, I don't want this shit. Vietnam. For me, it started out as an experience working with students, doing draft counseling. And then I began to think, well, you know, the folks that really need my help are not the students who are hiding with those deferments, but the guys that are on the front lines doing the real work and getting shot at. I don't want this thing. Damn. All right. All right, I'll speak louder. Look out. You've heard it before. So I started looking around, and there was a group of folks that had just started in Chicago called Chicago Area Military Project, and we were dedicated to working with GIs, helping them find legal ways to get out of the military, reading those damn Army regulations until our eyes crossed, finding loopholes, helping guys with their paperwork so they could, in fact, get out of the military in a legal fashion and didn't have to spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulder for the man. Folks, a lot of folks that went into the military went in and discovered a couple weeks down the line that their families were falling apart back home, or they could not deal in whatever regard with the military. Folks would go AWOL. We'd have people coming through saying, help, I need help, I need help. And we'd work with them on a continuing basis. Folks who came through from Vietnam, folks who came through from Germany, folks who came through from Fort Sheridan. We had the 5th Army Band. We didn't have any of the percussionists, but we had a lot of the flute players. And as the war progressed, our paper got spread out more and more around the world. Folks in the Philippines would be in contact with us. Folks out of Vietnam would be in contact with us. And eventually, as things started winding down, our organization said, well, you know, there are now a lot of veterans that are out in the world. They're not just active duty folks any longer. And so a percentage of people in the Chicago Area Military Project went on to do other things, and another percentage of us joined up with VVAW. I'd like to say that I have spent practically a good half of my life working around Vietnam. And until 1991, it was a country I'd never seen. In 91, Vietnam Vets Against the War sent a tour of 6 people, 3 couples, to Vietnam. And it's a great experience to go and see a country, not a war. Long live the friendship of the people of the United States and the Vietnamese.
Our next speaker is an internationally known person. Some of us are and some of us aren't. Some cases, probably best not to be known internationally. But this woman single-handedly brought to the attention of the world problems among Vietnam veterans and their children and their families with Agent Orange. We knew about it. A lot of us came in contact with it in Asia, and you saw in the film that was done in 1971 that it wasn't any big secret, but it was a secret from the American people, and in a lot of ways didn't hit home with the American people until it affected their own. Now we know the long-term ramifications of what's roughly called Agent Orange, but is actually referred to by the VA themselves as the chemical cocktail. The various mixture of different defoliants and poisons and God knows what sort of concepts and things they wanted to spray and try out on people and experiments and such. But this woman, in defiance of her superiors at the Veterans Administration, came forward to the American public the fact that Agent Orange was having a terrible effect on Vietnam veterans and their family. And as a result, she was eventually hounded out of her job, her federal job. But she will always have the respect and admiration of Vietnam veterans, their families, and people all over the world that had problems with Agent Orange and other chemical defoliants. I'd like to introduce Maude DeVictor. Called the international mother of Agent Orange. That doesn't mean you made the shit, you know. Well, we'll have to. I think that'll work. Step up and talk into that one.
I'm so happy to have been asked to join the Vietnam Veterans Against the War to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the end of the war. And more importantly, I'm so glad that we survived. You know, as I look back, there may be many other gatherings like this today, but this one has special meaning to me because in 1977, when I began to do the research as a then employee of the Veterans Administration here in Chicago, there were not too many people that were supportive. There were not too many people that even wanted to hear of it. And as I look back, even the incidences of the last 7 days with Oklahoma City, and with the impact of what we as, shall we say, the little people in America, trying to tell the truth, trying to let people know what actually had happened, also trying to speak for those who were unable to speak, but who knew they had been wrong. And now, with the impact of the Gulf War vets and other problems in the environment, that our little group was on the cutting edge. And the things that we used to have to sort of stand in the corner and say silently, they are now the, shall we say, the ruler by which other contamination activities are being judged. Also, as I look back on it, it was really the first grassroots movement in an entirely different area. People have always did community work around education, health issues, whether the highway should come through and cut down a couple of trees. But dealing with the military and the United States government and that problem of killing everybody at one time, or this whole activity toward killing more people quicker and deadlier, ours was the first movement. And it's been a lot of water under the bridge, over the dam. We've had a lot of ups and downs in our lives. We've lost a lot of people. But that whole sort, that compassion, that stick-to-itiveness, that full speed ahead, even though we're using Bengay now. You know, we started, we weren't, but we're using Bengay. And we're drinking a whole lot of orange juice now. We've aged together, and I just wanted all of you to know that I've met a lot of people, I've been a lot of places, but my heart is always not only with veterans, but specifically and especially with the Vietnam vet. And as we get to that next turn in life and we're in that old soldier's home or the old vet's home, I hope we'll still be able to boogie, we'll still be able to talk to high schoolers and college students and let them know really what America in its finest hour is truly about. Thank you very much. I'm plugged.
One of the most important things about our next speaker is the fact that he's an accomplished brewmeister from Wisconsin. He's also a longtime veterans activist. He's brought incredible cultural shows to not only the larger metropolitan areas, but even some smaller towns in Wisconsin. He's one of the major forces in veterans activities in Wisconsin, and we're proud to say that John Zutz is a member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. John. Should have brought some of your own product.
This is actually kind of a strange meeting for a VVAW. I'm not used to this. What we need here is some attitude adjustment. And I'm serious about this. We need some attitude adjustment. I mean, we've been out here for 20 years, you know, talking about how Vietnam affected us, what it did to us, and we've still got people that are out there, these right-wing assholes, that are out there on the radio stations and telling us that the war was right. We could have won. They won't even let us on to talk because we might actually know what we're talking about. We need some attitude adjustment. When we've got a Newt Gingrich and a Phil Gramm and who knows how many other national leaders in this country who were for the war all the way, but just couldn't quite bring themselves to sign on the dotted line, we need some attitude adjustment. At least I have more respect for our president. You know, the man actually stood up for what he believed in. He stood up and said, I'm against the war. But he paid the political price for it. He paid a big political price for it. We need some attitude adjustment. We can sit here, pat ourselves on the back, and we probably deserve it. We've worked long, we've worked hard. But even though the war is over, it's been over 20 years, the fight still goes on. We need some attitude adjustment.
And he throws down the mic and stalks from the stage. Our next person told me she wasn't ready to go on yet, so I said, yes, you are. Is Lisa Boucher. Lisa is also the daughter of Joe Miller, who spoke earlier. And Lisa would like to perform for us. A cappella.
I don't want that. Yes, you do. Test it.
Yeah, there it goes.
I'm going to sing a nonsense song because that's the only thing I can think of. And Bob Dylan did not write the tune to this. It's much older than Bob, actually. Okay. As I rode out in Ottoman town, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down, to show me the way to fair Ottoman town. I rode on a horse they call a gray mare, gray mane and gray tail, green stripes on his back, gray mane and gray tail, green stripes on his back, and not a hair on him that wasn't coal black. He stood so still, he threw me to the dirt, he ripped up my hide, and he bruised at my shirt. From saddle to stirrup, I mounted again, and on our 10 toes we rode over the plain. The king and the queen and the company more come a-riding behind and a-marching afore. A stark naked drummer come a-beating his drum with his hands in his pockets as he marched along. Sat down on a hot, cold, frozen stone, 10,000 around me, and yet I was alone. I took off my hat for to keep my head warm. 10,000 got drowned that never was born. As I rode out in Ottoman town, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down, not a soul would look up, not a soul would look down, to show me the way to fair Ottoman town. That's it.
The anti-war movement took in a lot of people. It was a broad thing. Beginning, it was peace activists, religious people who were objected to the war, conscientious objectors, and it grew. Veterans, GIs, people from all walks of life in our society. By the time the Vietnamese won and we ended the damn thing, there were a lot of people involved. People will never know the extent, how many people, the various walks of life. Very honored today to have a founding member of Business Executives Against the War in Vietnam, founded in 1967, Bud Salk.
Oh, good.
Step over here.
Okay.
There you go, sir. And talk into that also.
I was sitting at home and found in my mail an announcement about this event today. And as I've been reading through many of the things from McNamara's, not the band, we used to march to that in World War II when I was in service, but as reading through, I found that there was very little mention of what was a very important group that was organized in 1967. And we ran many ads in the Chicago newspapers about the debilitating effect of the military budget on our economy. And when we started, I got a call from the Wall Street Journal, and they wanted to know, were these really true business executives? And I told them that these are probably the most miserable, profit-oriented group they'll ever run into. We had business executives from every walk of life, including people like Sink Armstrong, who had been head of the SEC under Eisenhower and Assistant Secretary of Air, and during the Vietnam War as Executive VP of the U.S. Trust Company, the largest trust company in the world. He would lead prayers on the steps of Trinity Church against this. There were voices from virtually every part that you can think of. We had a staff of military advisors, retired generals and admirals who were on the board of our organization, including General Shoup, who was a retired commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps in 1963. And Payne Weber Jackson, who many of you may have heard of, one of the largest financial institutions in the United States, in February of 1968, ran a full-page ad in the New York Times that the most bullish thing that could happen to the stock market would be peace in Vietnam. Malcolm Forbes, who at that time was head of Forbes magazine, thought so much of the ad that they ran it free of charge in Forbes magazine. Next to a long article by the fellow who was head of Utah Construction Company, one of the largest in the country, who had been head of the Federal Reserve Bank under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I go back to a period, I was on General MacArthur's staff and was a graduate of the School for Military Governors in the Far East, and was in Japan with MacArthur there at that time. So I do come from a bit of activity in the military side as well. But there were many of us that recognized the debilitating effect of the military budget. And I remember giving a talk in Detroit at the time called Bulls, Doves, and 10% Mortgages, because 10% was unheard of about that. And one of the major reasons for our high interest rates on things is the military budget today. But there is, and one of the things that we have a problem with when the last speaker spoke about getting an attitude today are the missing pages in U.S. history. Because there was a fellow that some of you may have heard about, a General Smedley Butler, who was a commandant of the U.S. Marine Corps, and he retired in 1928. And there was a plot on Wall Street with the American Legion to try to keep Roosevelt from taking office after the election. And they wanted Smedley Butler to help lead this thing. And he, of course, refused, and he went before Congress and he testified. First he said, if you want to know more about this thing, call in the chief of staff of that day, who was a fellow named Douglas MacArthur, who had a major working for him named Eisenhower, who was sent out to burn down the shanty towns of the bonus marches at that time. And one of the most important things which runs through this whole history of dealing with retired military people who unfortunately did not open their yaps at the time they were in was the fact that as General Butler said, he said, we were He said there's a fellow out in Chicago who operates in 3 districts. His name is Al Capone. He said, we Marine Corps operated on 7 continents. We were gangsters for Wall Street. And this was his testimony before Congress at that time. But we always had, unfortunately, people who took very strong positions after they got out of service, such as the Center for Defense Information, which is made up of retired admirals, generals, and so forth. But I thought I just wanted to come out and talk about, and I have some copies of the ads we used to run when Agnew called us this effete group of business executive snobs, and some of the other ads that we ran in the Chicago paper, and the things that some 2,500 American church people signed for us to get out of Vietnam. And as I read about McNamara today, and I read about the charges that are starting to be levied against Bosnia and Serbia and some of the other places as war criminals, I do not think it is too late for us, for the various veterans groups around the country, to get together and ask for war trials, to name McNamara and other members as war criminals, because I think that's exactly what we were, and we've kept it up in our foreign policies, whether it was in El Salvador or in Guatemala or in Iraq or wherever it was. We kept up and still keep it up as killing many, many people. And the big thing that we must all join in is to turn around and recognize our national priorities, which are basically the most important resource we have in our society is a human resource. And we're a wealthy country. We get overspent on education and health and housing and job training. And I think this is where many of us, including business executives, are now starting to point their attention. And I just wanted this opportunity to remind people that there was a large constituency of prominent business executives around this country who were suggesting that the home builders at the time who couldn't get any funds, that they should get dressed in tails and chain themselves to the White House fence and in unison burn their American Express cards. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take this up here so people don't have to screw around with it.
Changing the tapes now?
Yeah.
We're changing the videotapes right now, so I'll give my spiel, and then no one will ever be able to prove that I've actually said it. One of the best things about working with Vietnam Veterans Against the War was the GI movement, working with the GI movement. Incredible things happened aboard ships and on military bases that people will never know about. There was no publicity or nothing ever done, but there was something that did get minor publicity. Early 1975, crew members aboard 5 nuclear submarines out of Hawaii went on strike. They went on strike basically Thresher, and on its first trial run crashed to the bottom of the ocean. And this is a song done in the tradition of Irish sea chanties, Irish prisoners aboard impressed into the British Navy about that particular incident. Oh, the Thresher, the finest atomic ship that ever dived for the sea. Each man on board was a volunteer there 'cause he chose there to be. Every man Jack on board was a hero. Every man Jack on board her was brave. Every man Jack on board was a hero, and each risked a watery grave. Now dive, said the captain, and we held our breath. Came a sound like she'd broken in two. That was the last word we ever heard from her, the last word we had from her crew. And every man Jack on board was a hero. Every man Jack on board her was brave. Every man Jack on board was a hero, and each risked a watery grave. Now their wives and their sweethearts, they came down to port, their last fond goodbyes there to say. Each tried their best to be careless and brave, and promised to meet there someday. And every man Jack on board was a hero. Every man Jack on board her was brave. Every man Jack on board was a hero, and each risked a watery grave. Now the thresher, yes, now her reactor is still, but very fine company she keeps. Men from the Lexington, the Hornet, and the Wasp are down there with her in the deep. And every man Jack on board was a hero. Every man Jack on board her was brave. Every man Jack on board was a hero, and each risked a watery grave. Oh, the thresher. Now we'll bring on one of the real professional musicians, Jim Wachtendonk. Thank you.
Bill, I've never heard you sing before. I've heard some great speeches, some great articles, read some great articles. Now there's a great song to add to that.
My grandfather always told me to hide my light under the bushel, you know.
Well, I asked my son what song should I sing the last song, and he said, Shades My Psyche Won't Forget. I started getting these dreams about a year ago. I'd wake up in the morning and go downstairs and get a cup of coffee, and I'd look out my back window, and there'd be jungle birds in my maples, and there'd be bamboo shoots there. And there was a boa that lived there also. And then I would wake up. The buzzer would wake me up for work, and I thought, what a dream. And then I would go downstairs and get a cup of coffee and look out the back window, and there was those bamboo shoots again, and that rock ape. And I said, I'm still asleep. And then the alarm would go off, and I'd get up and go downstairs and get a cup of coffee, and I'd just be afraid to look out there, you know, and I'd look out there and there wasn't anything, but all day I was expecting to see these creatures that speak to me. I wrote a song about it. It's called Shades My Psyche Won't Forget. It's on my R&R tape. There's a boa lives in my attic, color birds perch in my yard. The dimension that they live in is most magnificent, yet it's hard. They say on napalm burn their jungle, and can they come here and live with me? I don't know how they do it. They say it's a prolonged flashback fantasy. There's a rock ape in my maple tree where the bamboo shafts are long. They're joined by pink flamingos. All are graceful, all are strong. But no one gives them notice. It's just a sight for me to see. Each flashback lingers longer, shifting slowly into green. This trance runs parallel in time, each aptitude is set. All the colors seen in country, shades my psyche won't forget. Well, I'm pleased they found some safety and that our timelines coincide. I must agree with my menagerie that there's no longer a need to hide. Mother Earth the turtle spans near and far to sea. Her eyes like sapphires glimmer bright, and they weave tapestries for me. Each phase I blend into the next regards the color birds. Their spirits and those of others come to life as I write these words. Yet I see with understanding as each flashback ebb and flows. But I never know the moment when they'll appear and won't let go. As the flashback lingers longer, triple canopy appears. Lush greens of many colors, all is peaceful with no fears. Now I know this may sound bizarre, and you might think I've lost my sense. But don't prejudge, I'm okay, it's not my aim to be intense. So don't worry about my sanity, I'm at home with my jungle friends. We're safe in our dimension, and I hope it never ends. For the boa and the rocky, and the colored birds that call this home, I believe it's for a purpose, so I acquiesce and I let them roam. Yes, and no one gives them notice, it's just a sight for me to see. Each flashback lingers longer, shifting slowly into green. The trance runs parallel in time, each aptitude is set. All the colors seen in country, shades my psyche won't forget. And there's a boa lives in my attic, and colored birds perch in my yard. The dimension that they live in is most magnificent, yet it's hard. They say on napalm burn their jungle, and can they come here and live with me? Now I don't know how they do it. They say it's a prolonged flashback fantasy. The trance runs parallel in time, and each aptitude is set. All the colors seen in country, shades my psyche won't forget.
Joe Miller. Joe, who was up here earlier, has a letter to read to this group from Oscar Lopez, who is a political prisoner in the United States and a Vietnam veteran.
Thank you, Bill. As we celebrate the victory of one people's struggle, we need to remember that many other people are still in struggle. And Oscar Lopez Rivera is someone whom I have never met, but I have met his brother Jose, who's with us today, and other friends. And I've started writing to Oscar over the last couple of years. He was in Marion Prison and recently has been moved to the new maximum security prison at Florence, Colorado. And when I talked with Jose a while ago, I asked him if it would be possible if we can get a message from Oscar in support of this celebration. And so here it is. Oscar is a Vietnam vet, served in the U.S. Army in Vietnam in 1965. So you'll have to excuse me, I have to read it, and the eyes are old, so I'll try to be careful. My warm and heartfelt greetings to everyone. From this gulag, I join you in spirit to commemorate the end of the Vietnam War, a glorious moment for every freedom and justice-loving person. While it is important to enjoy and celebrate this commemorative moment, it's also crucial for all of us to keep a vigilant and critical attitude toward the U.S. government and its Vietnam policies, because the same powers that were responsible for the war are the ones going to Vietnam at this current juncture with basically the same interests, motives, and goals that they had before the war. They seek to exploit Vietnam's human and natural resources in order to do it and to protect their interests and investments. They'll call for U.S. intelligence agencies and the Pentagon to have a presence in Vietnam. And history has taught us how nefarious these entities could be. We should be concerned because in recent days we have witnessed the response from the powers that be, including powerful political figures and the media, to Robert McNamara's condemnation of the U.S. war against Vietnam. The media have created a loop where only McNamara's contrition and Bill Clinton's vindication have had any play. Kept out of this loop are the millions of Vietnamese who lost their lives or who were injured and maimed for life, those who were displaced and scattered all over the world, and the vast devastation of Vietnam's ecosystem. Also kept out are the victims of the war from Laos and Cambodia. In the latter, at this very moment, people continue to face the perils created by the war the U.S. brought to Vietnam and its neighbors. While this loop might serve McNamara's interest and to vindicate Bill Clinton, Newt Gingrich and Phil Gramm, who dodged the draft but remained politically viable, it's an anathema to those of us who experienced the horrors of the war in Vietnam, but who had the courage to condemn it and to struggle against it at a very dear price. In this gulag with me are Tom Manning and Ray Levasseur, both VVAW members, who had the valor to use their experience from Vietnam against the greatest enemy of humanity. Although we come from different backgrounds and a political ideological formation, we share a common denominator, the horrors of Vietnam and a commitment to struggle for life against the perpetrator of such horrors. I leave you with an embrace and asking you to remember that for those who dare to struggle, victory is their reward. En resistencia y lucha, Oscar Lopez Rivera.
Okay, we're running out of time here, and we got a lot of people who want to speak, so when I call your name, run to the stage. You have 30 seconds. Our next speaker is a member of VVAW. He's a GI activist, an Army brat. He's a GI counselor. He's a veterans counselor. He's not running. He's strolling. Ray Parrish. He also is director of MC Squared, Military Center for, or Midwest Center for Military Counseling. Thank you.
It's the Midwest Committee for Military Counseling. Nobody ever gets it right. It's just MC Squared. That's okay. That's what I wanted to let you know. There's still GI counseling going on. 1-800-FYI-95GI is a national toll-free number. That's FYI-95GI. There's a dozen groups across the country supporting that. But I want to bring you greetings from James Gates, Jr., the atomic bomb vet. He wishes he could be here, but back on Valentine's Day, I admitted him to the emergency room. It turns out that what's been bothering him for the past few years has been chronic appendicitis. And he finally went septic. They put him in a coma for 5 weeks to clean him up, and he's better. He's at home, he's recovering, and 14 nuclear bomb blasts can't kill him. Going septic with appendicitis can't either. It's a miracle he's alive. But I wanted to let you know, 20 years ago, I was still active duty, one of those younger Vietnam vets, I guess. And when the fall came, the one thing that stuck in my mind was, of course, I never have to worry about being sent to Vietnam. But the second thing was, I'm a brat, and no kids ever have to kiss their father again as they go away to Vietnam, like I did twice. So that's one of the things I wanted to remember was that, my God, the war is over, no more kids saying goodbye to Dad. But I also wanted to mention that what we got going these days is what I see as a right-wing backlash against us directly. Because we've been telling people that violence in the military breeds violence everywhere else, and if the Oklahoma City bombing doesn't prove that, I don't know what does. But they got a hard head, so we're going to have to slam it into them and never let them forget that stressed out vets are stressed out from being in the military. But the one last thing I wanted to let you all know is that we've got another brother on trial. He's being court-martialed. His name is Captain Rockwood. He was in Haiti. His job as an intelligence officer was to go in there and clean up their prison system. And they wouldn't let him do it, and he disobeyed orders and went in anyway and tried to do it, and they arrested him and threw him in jail for trying to clean up the civilian prison system in Haiti, and now they're court-martialing for him. Write letters. We need all the help we can get. Take care, brothers and sisters.
Just because we're in a hurry does not negate the importance of all the speakers that follow here, so please give them your